It started with silence, not the peaceful kind, not the kind you choose when you turn off the TV and sit with your thoughts. No, this silence was sharp, sudden, uninvited. I picked up my phone that morning like I had done every single day for years, pressed the power button, and nothing happened. I laughed a little at first, a soft, nervous laugh, ha ha ha, because phones freeze sometimes, right? I pressed it again. And again, still nothing. The screen stayed dark, blank, like it didn't even recognize me anymore. I sighed and told myself, relax, it's probably nothing. I put the phone down, poured myself a cup of coffee, and waited. Minutes passed. The coffee went cold, the phone stayed dead. No vibration, no missed calls, no little light blinking, just silence. A strange thought crossed my mind then, the kind you try to shake away quickly. What if something happened? I picked the phone up again, tried calling from the landline, straight to voicemail, not busy, not disconnected, just gone. That was the first crack, small but enough to make my chest feel tight. I told myself not to panic. I've lived long enough to know panic makes everything worse, so I grabbed my purse and walked to the grocery store. Normal routine, bread, tea, a few apples. I stood in line, smiled at the cashier like always, slid my debit card across the counter without a second thought. The machine beeped, then beeped again, then it flashed red, declined. I laughed again, louder this time, embarrassed. Oh, it must be the wrong card, I said, even though I knew it wasn't. I tried another one, same beep, same red screen. Declined. The cashier looked at me with that careful expression people use when they don't want to embarrass you. My face felt hot. My hands were shaking now. I paid with the small amount of cash I had and walked out, my heart pounding. Outside, I stood still for a moment, breathing in the cold air. Okay, I told myself, phone not working, cards not working, still coincidences happen, but deep down something didn't feel right. It felt organized. When I got home, I turned on my computer, or at least I tried to. No internet. The screen loaded and then gave up. I checked the modem. No lights. I unplugged it, plugged it back in. Nothing. I sat down slowly in the chair, my knees weak. That was when it hit me. Phone, bank cards, internet, all gone, all in one day, not slowly, not one by one over weeks, all at once. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Oh, that sound escaped my mouth before I could stop it. At my age, you learn patterns. You learn that accidents are messy. This wasn't messy. This was clean, precise. Like someone flipped 3 switches in the same room, and that's when a colder thought slid into my mind, quiet but heavy. Someone did this, not a company mistake, not a technical issue, someone close enough to know what mattered. Someone who knew exactly how to make me feel small, helpless, quiet. I walked around my house slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the table, grounding myself. This house has been mine for decades. I raised my child here. I buried my husband from this place. I paid every bill, signed every paper, made every hard decision within these walls. And yet, that afternoon, standing there with no phone, no money, no connection to the outside world, I felt like a guest in my own life. I laughed again, but this time it was bitter. So this is how it feels, I muttered to the empty room. The door opened a few hours later. I didn't hear a knock, I heard keys. That sound alone told me everything. He walked in like he always had, confident, rushed, already annoyed. My son. He looked at me, then at the phone on the table, then back at me. Mom, we need to talk, he said, using that tone people use when they've already decided the outcome. I stayed seated. There's a kind of strength in not standing up right away. What happened to my phone? I asked quietly. He sighed, that long, dramatic sigh. We turned off the plan. You don't really need all that technology anymore. It's confusing for you. Confusing. I almost smiled. Almost. It worked fine yesterday, I said. He waved that away like it didn't matter. That's not the point. Then he said it like it was nothing. Your bank cards are paused too. Just temporarily. We're simplifying things. Simplifying, another pretty word, another soft cover for something sharp. I felt my throat tight. And the internet, I asked. He avoided my eyes. That too. It's safer this way. Safer. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. So this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision, a plan made without me, about me. I could feel tears building, not because I was weak, but because something inside me was breaking open. A lifetime of trust cracking all at once. He talked and talked, explaining how it was for my own good, how I'd been slipping, how he was just trying to help. His words blurred together. All I could hear was the message underneath them. You don't get to decide anymore. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered when he stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to manage. When he finally left, the house felt quieter than before. Not peaceful, empty. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark phone on the table. No calls, no messages, no way to reach anyone unless I asked. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the money, not the technology, the control. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and let out a shaky laugh. Trapped and silenced, I whispered. It sounded dramatic when I said it out loud, but it didn't feel dramatic. It felt accurate. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the house creak, every sound louder than it should have been. and somewhere between midnight and morning, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not fear, awareness. They thought silence would break me. They thought taking everything at once would make me give up. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was that silence has a way of sharpening your hearing. And as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized something that made my heart beat a little steadier. If they had gone this far, it meant they were hiding something, and that meant this story was only just beginning. The next morning felt strange, like the house itself was waiting to hear what I would do. I moved slowly, making tea I barely tasted, sitting at the same table where my phone still lay face down, useless. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to light up on its own like it used to. It didn't. I sighed, a long one, the kind that comes from deep in your chest. Around mid-morning, the door opened again. Keys, no knock. This time he wasn't alone. His wife followed him in, heels clicking sharply on the floor. That sound alone made my jaw tight. She looked around the room like she was inspecting a rental property, not the home of the woman who helped raise her child. "Good morning," she said, overly sweet. I nodded but didn't stand. Sitting felt important. They didn't waste time. She placed a thick folder on the table, right next to my cold cup of tea, as if the table belonged to her. "We've been worried," she began. "About you." There it was, that word again, worried. I tilted my head slightly. "About what exactly?" I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Inside, my stomach was tight. Nodded. My son jumped in quickly like he'd rehearsed it. "Mom, you've been forgetting things, bills, appointments, that phone scam last month." I laughed softly, not happy laughter. The kind that slips out when something is so unfair it almost feels unreal. "I hung up on that man," I said. "Immediately," he frowned. "After you told him your street name, not the house number," I replied. "Details matter," his wife cleared her throat, annoyed. "This isn't about details," she said. "It's about safety, safety." I looked at her and felt something sink in my chest. Safety was their favorite word. It sounded warm, responsible. But it carried a shadow. "We're simplifying your life," she continued, sliding the folder closer to me. "We'll manage the accounts, appointments, everything stressful. You'll still get money each week, of course. Each week, like an allowance." I blinked slowly. "An allowance?" I repeated. She smiled, the kind of smile people use on children. "Just until things stabilize." I opened the folder, or rather, I tried to. My hands were shaking slightly now. Inside were pages and pages of words, boxes checked, signatures stamped. It all looked official, heavy, final. My son leaned forward, elbows on the table. "This is for your own good, Mom. You should have let us help sooner." That sentence landed harder than the rest, not because it was loud, but because it assumed something dangerous, that I had already failed. I looked up at him. "When did I ask for this?" I said quietly. He avoided my eyes. "You didn't," his wife answered instead. "That's the problem, you don't always know when you need help." I felt heat rise behind my eyes. There it was, that sting, not of fear, of being dismissed, reduced. "I've been taking care of myself for decades," I said. "I raised a family, I worked, I paid for this house." My son sighed again. That was then, like my past somehow expired, like all those years suddenly didn't count. He pointed to the papers. "We've already taken care of the important stuff. Phone plan canceled, cards paused, internet shut off. It's done." Done, the word echoed. I stared at the folder, at the neat stacks of paper, and realized something that made my throat tight. They weren't asking, they were informing. This wasn't a conversation, it was a declaration. I closed the folder slowly. My hands were steadier now, which surprised me. "Turn it back on," I said. My son shook his head immediately. "No. That would just confuse things." Confuse things. I almost laughed again. Instead, I felt something colder settle in my chest. "You made these decisions without me," I said. "You cut me off from the world." His wife leaned back, crossing her arms. "We protected you." Protected, another pretty word. I looked at both of them and suddenly felt very tired. Not old tired, soul tired. "You didn't protect me," I said softly. "You controlled me." My son stood up abruptly. "Don't make this dramatic." Dramatic, yes, that's what people call you when you name something they don't want named. They talked for a few more minutes, repeating the same phrases. Simplifying, safety, help. I heard them, but I also heard what they weren't saying. They weren't asking how I felt. They weren't asking what I wanted. They were building a cage and calling it care. When they finally left, the folder stayed behind on the table, thick and heavy like a stone. I sat there long after the door closed, staring at it. The house felt different now. Smaller, like the walls were leaning in slightly. I reached for the folder again, hesitated, then opened it properly this time. I flipped through the pages slowly, and then I saw it, my name, signed clear as day, only it wasn't my handwriting. The loops were wrong, the pressure was off. I felt my breath catch. "No," I whispered. My hands went cold. I traced the signature with my finger, my heart pounding. I had not signed this, not yesterday, not ever. A shaky laugh escaped me, half disbelief, half horror. "Ha ha ha, of course this was how they did it." Quietly, confidently, assuming I'd never look closely, assuming I'd never push back, I closed the folder and sat very still. The fear I'd felt earlier began to change shape. It didn't disappear, but it hardened into something else. something clearer. If they were willing to forge my name, willing to cut me off without warning, then this wasn't about help at all. This was about erasing me gently, politely, until I no longer mattered. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let out a slow breath. Sighed. They thought this was the end. They thought silence would make me smaller. But as I sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the house, one thought repeated itself, steady and sharp. If they're hiding this, what else are they hiding? I didn't move for a long time after that. I just sat there, staring at the closed folder like it might bite me if I touched it again. My name, my handwriting, or something pretending to be it. My heart was beating fast now, loud enough that I could hear it in my ears. Thump, thump. I placed my hand on my chest and let out a slow breath. Okay, panic wouldn't help. Panic never does. I opened the folder again, this time slowly, carefully, like I was handling something fragile. Page after page, each one had the same signature. My name written confidently, casually, like the person who signed it had no fear of being caught. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Ha ha ha, of course. Whoever did this wasn't nervous. They were sure I wouldn't question it. They were sure I'd just accept it, because that's what they thought age does to a person, makes them obedient. Makes them tired, makes them stop checking. I pressed my finger to the paper again. I've signed my name thousands of times in my life. Forms, letters, documents. I know how my hand moves. This wasn't it. The loops were too wide. The pressure too even. No hesitation, no pause. Whoever forged it didn't understand something important. My signature changes slightly when I'm tired, when I'm rushed, when I'm emotional. This one didn't change at all. It was neat, practiced. Rushed in confidence, not fear. A wave of something hot moved through me. Not anger exactly, not yet, more like betrayal settling into place. I whispered, "You really thought I wouldn't notice?" My voice sounded strange in the quiet room. Older, stronger. I flipped to the first page again and read it properly this time, not as background noise but as intent. Words like authorization, caretaker, financial management, they jumped out now. Caretaker. That word made my stomach twist. I closed the folder and leaned back, rubbing my eyes. My chest felt heavy, not because of the paper but because of what it meant. This wasn't something decided in a moment. This wasn't panic or impulse. This was planned, thought through, probably discussed over dinner, maybe laughed about. I could almost hear it. She won't understand. She'll be confused. She'll go along with it. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the world looked the same. Cars passed, a neighbor walked their dog, normal life continued. Inside, everything had shifted. I thought back over the past year, little comments that hadn't seemed important at the time. How much do you keep in savings? Do you still remember your passwords? What would you do if something happened to you? I had answered casually, honestly. Family talk. I told myself that's all it was, but now, standing there with forged documents on my table, those memories rearranged themselves into a pattern. Questions weren't curiosity, they were inventory, testing. Measuring how close they were to control, I felt a lump rise in my throat. Weeping threatened, the quiet kind, the kind that sneaks up on you when truth settles in too fast. I wiped my eyes quickly. No, I told myself. Not yet. I went back to the table and gathered the papers into a neat stack. If they were going to treat my life like paperwork, then fine. I would read every line. I would understand every move. I spent the next hour going through everything slowly. Dates, names, boxes checked without my knowledge, requests submitted in my name. Each discovery felt like another door quietly closing behind me, showing how narrow the path they planned for me really was. One page made my hands shake again. A section about future care. Assisted living mentioned casually like a suggestion, not a sentence. My breath caught. You were already deciding where I'd live, I whispered. The room didn't answer, the house just held the sound. I imagined waking up one day and being told it was time to move, that it was already arranged, that it was safer, easier. I pushed the papers away and stood up again, pacing slowly. My joints ached, but I didn't mind. Movement helped me think. Okay, I said out loud, okay. Fear doesn't disappear when you name it, but it shrinks a little, and something else was growing in its place. Awareness, sharp, clear awareness. If they were willing to go this far without telling me, then this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something much bigger. I sat back down and folded my hands together, forcing them to stop shaking. I thought about calling someone, anyone. But then I stopped. Who could I call? My phone was dead, my internet gone, my cards useless. I let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Ha, trapped, that was the word. They hadn't just taken things away. They'd isolated me, and then right there in that quiet, something clicked, not a device, not a switch. A thought, clear, calm, almost comforting. They turned off what they could see. They shut down the things they understood. Phone, money, internet. But they had forgotten something important, something they never bothered to check. I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't as alone as they thought. I looked at the folder again, this time without fear, more like curiosity. If they were this confident, this careless, then they had left trails. People always do when they think they've already won. I felt my breathing slow, my shoulders relaxed slightly. The storm inside me wasn't gone, but it was organized now. I gathered the papers, placed them neatly back into the folder, and set it aside with intention. This wasn't something to hide, this was something to use. I wiped my eyes one last time and gave a small, almost amused shake of my head. You really underestimated me, I murmured, and as I sat there in the quiet, the silence no longer felt like a weapon pointed at me. It felt like space, space to think, space to plan, space to turn something back on very carefully. The first thing I turned back on wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, it was my mind. I sat there for a few minutes longer, listening to the quiet, letting it stop feeling like an enemy. Silence, I realized, can either crush you or give you room to think. I chose the second one. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked next door. My neighbor opened the door with a surprised smile. "Everything okay?" she asked. I smiled back, small and polite. "Could I borrow your phone for a moment?" Her smile softened immediately. She didn't ask questions, she just stepped aside. Kindness like that still exists, quietly. Thank God. My hands shook a little as I dialed. Not because I was scared, but because this was the first move. The moment where things either stayed broken or started changing. The automated voice came on, cheerful and completely unaware of my situation. I waited. Pressed the numbers, breathed, sighed. Patience is something age gives you whether you ask for it or not. When a real person finally answered, I straightened my back. My voice surprised me. It sounded steady. "Hello," I said. "My name is Mary. I need to report unauthorized changes to my account." There was a pause, a respectful one, the kind where someone starts listening. She asked me a few questions, dates, names. I answered calmly, clearly. I didn't rush. Rushing is what guilty people do. Then she said something that made my heart skip. "I see several changes made yesterday. A caretaker authorization, spending limits, account restrictions." Caretaker, that word again. I closed my eyes briefly. "I didn't authorize any of that," I said, "and the signature is not mine." Silence, then her tone shifted, lower, serious. "In that case," she said, "we need to treat this as potential fraud." Fraud. The word felt heavy but also clarifying. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. This wasn't concern. This had a name, and names matter. She asked if I could come in person. "Yes," I said immediately. I thanked my neighbor, squeezed her hand, and stepped back outside. The air felt colder than before, but sharper too, like it was waking me up. I hadn't taken the bus in years. I used to drive everywhere. But that morning, standing at the bus stop, I felt something unexpected. Independent, not glamorous, just real. The driver nodded at me, helped me up the steps without making a show of it. I sat by the window and watched the city pass. Life was still moving. That mattered more than I expected. At the bank, everything smelled clean and serious. Wood polish, paper, control. A young woman met me and led me into a small office. She closed the door gently. "Mrs. Mary," she said, "I've reviewed the documents." She turned the papers toward me. "Is this your signature?" I didn't hesitate. "No," one word, clear, final. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Then we'll freeze all pending changes immediately." I felt my shoulders drop an inch, just a little. She continued, typing quickly. "I also need to inform you, someone attempted to initiate a guardianship request." That word hit harder than fraud. Guardianship, a legal cage with a nice name. My mouth went dry. "Has it gone through?" I asked. "No," she said, "not yet, not yet." Those two words felt like oxygen. She looked at me carefully. "Did you give anyone permission to manage your finances?" "No," I said again. She nodded once. "Then you're still in control." Still. That word mattered too. She explained the steps. New card, new access, voice verification. Restrictions on who could make changes. Each sentence felt like a brick being placed back where it belonged. When she slid the temporary card across the desk, my eyes stung unexpectedly. Not because of the card. Because someone believed me, because someone saw me as capable. "You may want to consult a lawyer," she added gently. "Just to protect yourself." Protect myself. I almost laughed, softly. Ha ha ha, imagine that. Being told I needed protection from my own child. I stepped back outside with a folder under my arm and the card in my wallet. The sky looked different. Same clouds, different feeling. Halfway home, my coat pocket buzzed. I froze. My phone, I pulled it out slowly like it might disappear again. The screen lit up with a single message. "Service restored. Please contact administrator, not me, not family, administrator." I stared at the word, my stomach tightening. They had turned it back on just enough to remind me who they thought was in charge. A chill ran through me. This wasn't kindness, this was surveillance. Control. With a smile, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting cars pass, letting the phone vibrate in my hand. They thought restoring the phone would calm me, make me grateful, make me quiet. Instead, it confirmed everything. They weren't done, they were watching. When I reached my house, I placed the bank folder on the table next to the forged documents. 2 stacks, 2 stories, one built on lies, one built on facts. I hadn't won anything yet. But I wasn't trapped anymore. I turned on the kettle out of habit, though my hands were still shaking. The sound of it heating felt grounding. Then the doorbell rang. Sharp, impatient. I didn't need to look, I knew that sound. I opened the door slowly. My son stood there, face flushed, eyes wild. What did you do? He demanded. I met his gaze calmly. I corrected a mistake, I said. He stepped inside like he owned the place. You froze the accounts. You made everything harder. Harder for whom? I wondered. Out loud, I said, you forged my signature. He didn't deny it, not even once. He just changed direction. We talked to a lawyer, he said. We were told it was the fastest way to erase me, I thought. I poured hot water into a cup, letting the steam rise between us like a wall. If that isn't stealing, I said quietly, then explain to me what is. He paced. He blamed stress, bills, pressure, and then he slipped. Your money was going to help us anyway. There it was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and felt something settle inside me. Cold, solid, certain. This wasn't about my safety. This was about their lifestyle, their comfort, built on my silence. When he finally left, slamming the door behind him, I sat back down and exhaled deeply. Sigh, the quiet returned, but it felt different now. Not empty, not threatening, purposeful. They thought turning things off would end me, but I had just turned something back on, and they had no idea how far I was willing to go next. They didn't know who they were dealing with. That sounds dramatic when people say it, but in my case, it was simply true. Not because I was powerful or clever or brave in some heroic way, but because they had forgotten my past. Or maybe they never bothered to learn it in the first place. After my son left that day, the house felt still, but my mind wasn't. I moved slowly, deliberately, like every step mattered. I didn't rush. Rushing is what panicked people do. I opened the hallway closet and reached for the top shelf, the one most people forget exists. My shoulder protested a little as I stretched. Easy, I whispered to myself, sighing. Then my fingers touched the edge of an old shoebox. I brought it down and set it on the table. The box looked ordinary, faded, nothing special, but inside it was something my son never knew about: discipline, memory, proof. I opened it carefully, papers folded neatly, receipts, old statements, insurance letters, copies of deeds, notes written in my handwriting from years ago. I smiled faintly. My husband used to tease me about this. You keep everything, he'd say, and I'd laugh and tell him one day it'll matter. Turns out that day had arrived. I sat down and began sorting. Slowly, patiently. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned off, leaving something sharper behind: focus. I placed the forged documents on one side of the table, my documents on the other, truth and lies sitting quietly next to each other like they always do in real life. The difference is most people never stop to separate them. As I went through the papers, memories surfaced, not emotional ones, practical ones, long nights at work, learning how systems function, learning how people try to bend them. Back then, I wasn't someone's elderly mother. I was the person people came to when things were complicated, when paperwork mattered, when mistakes were expensive. I knew how to read between lines. I knew what questions not to ask out loud. My son didn't know that version of me, or maybe he chose to forget it. To him, I was just mom, someone predictable, someone who would sigh, maybe cry a little, and then give in. I chuckled softly at that thought. Ha ha ha, he really thought that was all I was. I noticed patterns as I worked. Dates that lined up too neatly. Forms submitted within hours of each other, requests made during times he knew I'd be alone. This wasn't a panic move, this was planned, and the more I saw, the calmer I became. Fear lives in confusion. Clarity does the opposite. I found the property deed, my name only, no joint ownership, no loopholes. I felt my shoulders relax. I found my insurance policy, updated recently without his involvement. I found medical papers clearly stating I was mentally capable. I tapped the page with my finger and smiled. Still sharp, I whispered. My reflection in the dark window looked tired, yes, but steady. As I worked, a knock came at the door. Soft, hesitant. I froze for a moment, then walked over and opened it. My granddaughter stood there, twisting her hands. "Grandma," she said quietly, "Dad's been really upset." I stepped aside and let her in. She looked at the table, at the stacks of paper. "Is everything okay?" I took a breath. This part hurt more than the rest. "Your father tried to take control of my life," I said gently. Her eyes widened. "He said he was helping." "Of course he did," I nodded. "He says a lot of things." She sat down slowly, absorbing it. "They talked about moving you," she admitted. "Somewhere safer." Safer again. I closed my eyes briefly. "Did they ask me?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, that answer said everything." She reached for my hand. "I didn't think they'd actually do it," she whispered. "I'm sorry." I squeezed her fingers. "You didn't do this," I said, "but thank you for telling me." She looked at me with a mix of fear and pride. "What are you going to do?" I looked back at the table, at the evidence, at the quiet strength sitting there. "I'm going to protect myself," I said, "properly this time." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Tell me if you need help," she said. That mattered. More than she knew. After she left, the house felt warmer, not happier, but steadier. I gathered everything into neat piles. My son had assumed I was disorganized. That age had made me careless, but age had done the opposite. It had taught me patience. It had taught me that most people reveal themselves when they think you're not watching. I placed all the important documents into a new folder. A stronger one, blue, solid. Then I sat back and laughed quietly to myself. Ha ha ha, they thought turning off my phone made me powerless. They didn't realize it gave me time to think. Time to remember who I used to be. That evening, as I cleaned the kitchen, my phone buzzed again. Another message, another attempt to look in control. I didn't respond, I didn't need to. Control doesn't shout. It waits. I washed the last cup, dried my hands, and looked around my home. This place held decades of my decisions, my sacrifices, my mistakes, and my strength. No one was going to rewrite that without a fight, not quietly. Not politely, not ever. As I turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom, one thought stayed with me, steady and unshakable. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They were about to learn the difference between silence and preparation. The strange thing was, once everything was laid out in front of me, once the fear stopped shouting, I didn't feel rushed anymore. I felt centered, like I had stepped out of a storm and realized I wasn't drowning, I was just wet. I sat at the table again, the blue folder in front of me, the forged papers beside it, and let myself breathe. Deep breath in, slow breath out. Sigh. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was a situation. And situations can be handled. I reached for my phone. It was working now, technically. Messages came through in little bursts, like someone testing a leash. Notifications, missed calls. I didn't open them yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need the noise. Silence, I'd learned, is powerful when you choose it. I set the phone face down and focused on what mattered. I made a list, not in my head, on paper, pen in hand. There's something grounding about writing things down. It makes them real but manageable. First, secure my finances. Second, stop unauthorized access. Third, document everything, dates, times, words, actions. I smiled faintly as I wrote. They thought I wouldn't keep track. They were very wrong, and before I go any further, let me pause for just a second. If you're listening to this and your chest feels tight, if any part of this story sounds uncomfortably familiar, then stay with me. And maybe subscribe, not because this is entertaining, but because these stories matter, because silence protects the wrong people, and because you never know when someone else's story might give you the strength to face your own. Okay, back to the truth. That afternoon, I made a call I should have made earlier in life, not in panic, not in tears, calmly. I spoke clearly, slowly, like someone who knew what they were saying. I explained the forged signature. The sudden shutoffs, the attempted control. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't soften it either. Facts don't need decoration. They stand on their own. After I hung up, I felt lighter, not relieved, empowered. There's a difference. Relief comes when something ends. Empowerment comes when you realize you're no longer waiting for permission. I walked through the house, checking doors, windows, drawers, not because I was scared, but because I was reclaiming space. This was still my home, every corner of it. Later, there was another knock at the door. This one was different, polite, measured. A woman stood there with a clipboard, posture careful, voice gentle. "I'm here to check in," she said. "Your family asked us to stop by." Ah, so they'd moved to the next step. I almost laughed. Ha ha ha, predictable. I didn't invite her in right away. I asked questions instead, simple ones. "Why are you here? What exactly were you told?" I watched her expression change as she looked past me into the house. Clean, organized, papers neatly stacked, no confusion, no chaos. Just a woman who knew exactly what was happening to her. She softened. Professionals can tell when something doesn't add up. I let her see the documents, not all of them, just enough. Her eyes widened slightly. "You seem very capable," she said. I nodded. "I am." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "If your family pushes this further, documentation will matter." I smiled. "Good," I said. "I've been documenting everything." When she left, I closed the door gently and leaned against it for a moment. All my hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. The kind that comes when you realize the ground under someone else's feet is starting to crack. That evening the house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It felt watchful, ready. I placed the blue folder in a drawer and locked it. Not to hide it, to protect it. Then I made myself a simple dinner and ate slowly, tasting each bite. Survival isn't dramatic, it's practical. As night settled in, I looked at my phone one last time. More missed calls, more messages. Demands wrapped in concern. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They were beginning to realize something important. Turning things off didn't erase me. It woke me up, and as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control, quiet, solid control. They still thought they were ahead, but they were reacting now. And I was planning. That's when you know the balance has shifted. They didn't stay quiet for long. People who are used to control never do. The moment they feel it slipping, they panic. And panic makes people loud. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd even finished my tea. One call, then another, then three more. I didn't answer. I just watched the screen light up and go dark again. Each vibration felt less threatening than the last. Funny how that works. When you stop reacting, the noise loses its power. I sighed softly and took another sip, cold tea. I didn't mind. By noon the messages started, long ones, careful ones, words like concerned, worried, please respond, then shorter ones, sharper, you need to fix this, you're making things worse. I smiled to myself, worse for whom, I wondered. Certainly not for me. In the early afternoon the doorbell rang, not once, twice, then a hard knock. I knew that rhythm. I didn't rush. I washed my hands, dried them slowly, and then walked to the door. When I opened it, my son stood there, face tight, jaw clenched, eyes burning with frustration. He stepped forward immediately, like he always had. Like the house still belonged to him. "Mom, what are you doing?" he demanded. Not "are you okay?" Not "can we talk?" What are you doing? I stepped aside just enough to let him in, then closed the door behind us. I didn't invite him to sit. He didn't wait. He paced the room like a caged animal. "You froze the accounts," he said. "You blocked access. You embarrassed us." Embarrassed, that word again, always about how it looks, never about what it is. "I protected myself," I replied calmly. My voice sounded steady even to my own ears. That surprised me a little. "Ha ha ha, growth, I suppose. You don't understand," he snapped. "Bills are bouncing, things are failing. Laura's panicking." I looked at him quietly. "That sounds stressful," I said, "but it's not my emergency." He stopped pacing and stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "Not your emergency," he repeated. "You're the reason we're in this mess." There it was, the truth slipping out sideways. I folded my hands together to keep them still. "You built your life assuming my money was always available," I said, without asking. Without honesty, his face reddened. "We helped you for years," he shot back. I laughed then, not loud, not cruel, just a short breath of disbelief. "No," I said, "I helped you." That landed. I could see it in his eyes, the shift. The realization he'd been avoiding. He tried another angle. "You're confused," he said, softer now, more dangerous. "This is exactly what we were worried about." I felt my spine straighten. "Do not do that," I said quietly. "Do not question my mind because I stopped agreeing with you." For a moment he looked almost startled, like he hadn't expected resistance to sound so calm. "You're acting erratically," he insisted, refusing help. "Shutting us out," I nodded slowly. "I'm acting independently," I corrected. "You just don't recognize the difference." He rubbed his face with both hands, breathing hard. "Mom, please just sign the papers. We'll turn everything back on." The offer hung in the air, heavy and revealing. "Sign and you'll get your life back." I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. Also, that's what this was, compliance for comfort. "No," I said, one word. No explanation, no apology. His shoulders slumped slightly, then stiffened again. "Then we'll take this further," he warned. "We'll bring people, professionals. You can't stop that." I looked at him steadily. "You can try," I said. "But you should be very careful what you put in writing from now on." He stared at me, suspicion flickering across his face. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Silence can say more than threats ever could. He exhaled sharply and grabbed his coat. "This isn't over," he said at the door. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm prepared." He left without another word, the door slamming behind him. I stood there for a moment, heart beating fast now, not from fear but from the adrenaline of standing my ground. My hands trembled slightly. I let them. Weeping threatened, just a little, the release kind, not the breaking kind. I wiped my eyes and laughed softly. "Ha ha ha, imagine that. Standing up to your own child." I sat down in my chair and let the quiet return. The house didn't feel invaded anymore. It felt defended. They had escalated just like I expected, raised their voice, tightened their grip, but escalation is always a sign of weakness, not strength. It means the old method stopped working, and as I sat there, breathing slowly, one thought settled in with absolute certainty. They weren't controlling the situation anymore. They were reacting to it, and once someone starts reacting, they've already lost more ground than they realize. The click was quiet, almost disappointing, really. No dramatic sound, no flashing lights, just a small confirmation on a screen that said approved. And yet that single click did more than all the shouting, all the threats, all the fake concern put together. I was sitting at the table when it happened. Same chair, same spot. My hands were steady this time. No shaking, no rushing. I entered the last confirmation calmly, read it twice, then once more just to be sure. People think power feels loud. It doesn't. Power feels boring, precise. Done. A few seconds passed, then my phone buzzed once, then again. Notifications started appearing like raindrops. Card updated, access restored, restrictions lifted. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I just sat there staring at the screen, letting it sink in. Mine. All of it was mine again. Then the other notifications came, not for me, about them. Unauthorized access attempt blocked, linked device removed. Secondary card disabled. I let out a slow breath and leaned back in my chair. Sighed. That sound wasn't relief, it was closure, something heavy leaving my body. 4 years they'd had quiet access, not official, not honest. Just enough to lean on, just enough to build a life that assumed I would always cover the gap. And now, in a matter of seconds, that invisible support vanished, not out of revenge. Out of correction, I made tea and carried it carefully to the table like nothing extraordinary had just happened. Survival teaches you that drama wastes energy. I took a sip, warm, steady, real, then my phone lit up again. This time with a call, my son's name. I watched it ring. I didn't answer, not yet. Another buzz, a message, short, panicked. What did you do? I smiled faintly, more to myself than anything else. Ha ha ha, so this is what it feels like when the balance shifts. When the person who always reacted finally stops, within minutes more messages followed. From him, from his wife, from numbers I hadn't seen in months. Everyone suddenly awake, everyone suddenly needing answers. I didn't respond to a single one, silence again. But this time it was mine. I tested my card later that afternoon, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted the ritual. Grocery store, same cashier, same machine. I slid the card in slowly, beep, approved. The sound was small, ordinary, but my eyes stung anyway. Imagine that. Dignity returning in the form of a receipt. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting. I didn't listen right away. I sat down first, breathed, grounded myself, then I pressed play. His voice came through tight, frantic, stripped of authority. Mom, something's wrong. My card isn't working. The transfers failed. Call me. Now I stopped the message before it finished. Another came in seconds later. Louder, angrier. You've gone too far, too far. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Ha ha ha, funny how reclaiming what's yours always sounds extreme to the people who benefited from taking it. I stood up and walked through the house, room by room, touching things again. The back of the couch, the picture frames, the window latch, everything felt anchored, not because of ownership but because of choice. I hadn't taken something from them. I'd taken myself back. By evening, the calls slowed, panic burns fast. Exhaustion follows. I sat by the window and watched the sky change color, phone resting face down on the table. No more buzzing, no more demands, just quiet. The good kind this time. They thought one click would trap me. They thought flipping switches would make me small. They never imagined that one careful click done in silence would pull the ground out from under their feet instead, and as night settled in, one truth settled even deeper. This wasn't the end. Not yet, but the rules had changed, and for the first time since all of this began, I was the one writing them. The truth didn't come out in a scream. It never does. It came out in a quiet room with two chairs facing each other and nothing left to hide behind. He came the next day. Not pounding this time, not demanding, just a knock, one knock. I let it sit there for a moment, not to punish him, but to feel the difference. Then I opened the door. He looked smaller, not younger, smaller, shoulders rounded, eyes tired. The confidence he usually wore like armor was gone. Mom, he said, just that, no lecture, no accusation. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the afternoon light laying flat across the floor like it was trying not to interfere. He didn't speak right away, neither did I. Silence again, but this silence wasn't sharp, it was honest. I didn't think you'd actually do it, he finally said. His voice was low, not angry, more shaken. I tilted my head slightly. Do what? I asked, even though we both knew. He swallowed. Take everything back. There it was, not your life, not your rights, everything back, like it had belonged to him in the first place. I didn't correct him this time. I just watched his face. He looked older than I remembered. Stress will do that to you when it finally has nowhere to hide. We were under pressure, he continued. Bills, the house, things kept stacking up. I nodded slowly. They usually do, I said. He rubbed his hands together like he was cold. It felt easier letting you handle some of it. Easier. I closed my eyes for a second. That word carried years inside it, years of quiet help. Of late-night transfers, of problems I solved so he wouldn't have to. You didn't let me handle it, I said gently. You assumed I would. He flinched, just a little, enough to show it landed. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quickly. We thought you wouldn't notice. I opened my eyes and looked at him. That's the part that hurts, I said. Not that you were struggling, but that you thought I wouldn't notice my own life being taken away. He stared at the floor. For a long moment he said nothing, then very quietly, I didn't think you'd fight back. There it was, the sentence he never meant to say out loud. I let it sit between us. I didn't rush to fill the space. Let him hear it echo. I wasn't fighting you, I said finally. I was defending myself. He nodded slowly. Laura says you've changed. I smiled faintly. Ha ha ha, that one almost made me laugh out loud. No, I replied. I stopped shrinking. He looked up at me then, really looked, not as a problem, not as a responsibility, as a person. His eyes were wet now, though he tried to hide it. I didn't know how far we'd gone, he admitted. I didn't know how to stop once it started. I leaned back in my chair, tired but steady. That's how control works, I said. It feels useful at first, then it owns you. He nodded again, slower this time. Are you going to cut us off completely? He asked. The fear in his voice was real, not financial fear, emotional fear. I considered the question carefully. No, I said, but things will be different. He waited. You don't manage me. You don't decide for me, and you don't touch what isn't yours. He breathed out like he'd been holding it for days. Okay, he said, just that. No argument, no defense, acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was honesty. And honesty is where real repair begins, if it begins at all. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. I'm sorry, he said again. This time it wasn't rushed, it wasn't strategic. It was tired and bare and real. I nodded. I know, I said, and I did. After he left, I sat in the same chair for a long time, staring at the space he'd been sitting in. My chest felt heavy but not crushed. Weeping came then, quietly, just a few tears sliding down my face. Not for what he did, for how close I came to disappearing before I realized I didn't have to. I wiped my eyes and laughed softly through the tears. Ha ha ha, imagine that, needing to fight your own child to be seen again. The house was quiet once more, but this time it felt settled, like something painful had finally been said out loud and could stop living in the walls they tried to erase me in one day. But what they really did was force the truth into the open, and once truth is spoken, it doesn't go back into hiding. The morning after that conversation, I woke up before the sun, not because I was anxious, because my body finally felt finished with something. You know that feeling, when a long illness breaks or a storm passes and the quiet afterward feels earned. I lay there for a moment, listening to the house breathe. The walls didn't feel like they were leaning in anymore. They felt settled. I made tea and stood by the window, watching light slowly creep across the street. Nothing dramatic happened. No messages, no calls, just an ordinary morning, and for the first time in a long while, ordinary felt like a gift. I sighed softly and let my shoulders drop. This was what peace looked like, not excitement, not victory. Just space. I spent that day doing small things: laundry, watering plants, organizing a drawer I'd been meaning to fix for years. Simple actions, but each one reminded me that I still belonged to my life. No one rushing me. No one monitoring, no one deciding what was best for me behind my back. I laughed quietly to myself at one point. Ha ha ha, imagine that. Freedom feels boring when you're finally allowed to have it. I thought about everything that had happened. The silence, the fear, the moment I realized what they were trying to do, and then I thought about the version of myself who almost accepted it, who almost believed the story they were telling. That version of me felt far away now. Not weak, just unaware. We all have moments like that. Moments where we don't realize we're being pushed until our feet are almost off the ground. By the afternoon, I made one last decision, not out of anger, out of clarity. I set boundaries, real ones, written ones, clear ones, not punishments, protections, because love without boundaries isn't love, it's access, and access without respect is dangerous. I didn't announce it, I didn't explain it. I simply did it. That evening my phone buzzed once. A message from my son. Short, careful, respectful, no demands, no pressure, just space. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. I smiled faintly and placed the phone face down. Control doesn't require constant response. It requires confidence. As the sky darkened, I sat in my favorite chair and let the quiet settle around me one last time, not the silence they tried to force on me. The silence I chose. There's a difference. One erases you, the other restores you. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this: being underestimated is not the same as being powerless. People confuse quiet with weakness all the time. They mistake patience for permission. They assume age makes you smaller. It doesn't, it makes you sharper. It teaches you when to speak and when to act. My son tried to erase me in one day, and for a moment it almost worked. But silence didn't break me, it woke me up. And once you wake up, truly wake up, no one can turn you off again. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt controlled, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside, you're not alone. And you're not invisible. If you want more stories like this, real stories about reclaiming yourself, then subscribe. Not for drama, not for revenge, but for truth.